Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it is coffee time. As you know, we go across things, over some of the things in the media today. The media mainstream, the group of which we can put absolutely zero trust in. They've shattered even the most trusting people should have suspicion about the mainstream media today. Lies, lies, and more lies. But in any case, that's not the topic of our talk today. Welcome to the regulars in the channel here. As you know, we have special guest Janice with us, and we're going to talk about Jordan Peterson. Many of you who know him, probably all of you know Jordan Peterson, who spent some better part of a year, or maybe it's more than a year, struggling with serious health issues and ended up over in Russia, I believe it was, or some Eastern European countries seeking various treatments. And he's come back to life. He's coming out with a new book, and he was interviewed by, I always forget her name, Decca Airhead or something like this, or Decca, every time I see her name it thinks Airhead, but in any case, Decca Aitkenhead or something like this. So, with no further ado, she tore Peterson to pieces in terms of a hit piece. Absolutely ridiculously unreasonable, revealing herself to be a callous, cynical, committed leftist whose only intent is on destroying anyone who disagrees with leftist opinions in even a minor way, to destroy their credibility. And as a result, Peterson released in YouTube the entire recorded interview, which, if you listen to it, completely puts the lie to what Aitkenhead said. She picked and chose and completely misrepresented Peterson, misrepresented the interview, and the only reason we can think of that she would do that is to totally discredit and destroy another human being. One who, you can detect in the interview, was 100% compassionate, honest, and open to a fault, even putting himself on the line and at risk of criticism with his extraordinary degree of honesty and revelation on a personal level. Aitkenhead just took inhumane advantage of that. So with no further ado, I'm bringing in Janice Fiamengo. And Janice, 1 minute here. Janice, welcome to the show again.
Hey, hi, Steve. Yeah, I really agree with everything that you just said, and you've summed up my position as well. The level of mendacity, that just the outright dishonesty and misrepresentation in that the discussion of the interview, the article about the interview by this Decca Aitkenhead is astounding. That's a really interesting story in itself. The determination to misrepresent him, and like the malice behind that is fascinating to behold. This is a case study in manipulation of the truth. And as you said, it's particularly egregious if you listen to the original interview. I have to say, I did not listen. There are two interviews, of course. There's the one with Jordan Peterson himself, and previously there had been one with his daughter, an even longer interview. And the two of those interviews are available online. We can put a link to it, but anybody can find it really easily by searching Google. And I didn't listen to the interview with Michaela Peterson, but if you listen to the interview with Jordan, I mean, it's like kicking a puppy to do what she did with the interview. He was markedly open, sincere, willing to engage in self-examination, willing to criticize himself. It's amazing that a human being, knowing what he has endured over the past, I think it's really been a full 2 years of his living hell.
That long? Wow.
Yeah, because you may remember, we actually did a video last year at about this time, I think it was actually in March, about the very nasty public reaction to revelations of what he had endured in the previous year. I believe it was in February of 2020, just before the COVID disaster struck, that an article was published in the Canadian newspaper, the National Post, and it was called something like Jordan Peterson's Year from Hell. And in that article, Michaela Peterson revealed all that had happened over the previous year, the discovery of Jordan's wife. I'm forgetting her name right now. I know it, Tammy. Tammy's cancer. She was diagnosed with a lethal cancer. She was expected to die within the year. Miraculously, it seems she did not die, but and so immediately she began having surgery and treatments, and many things went wrong. And then Jordan had this very powerful negative reaction to the benzodiazepine that he'd been taking for a number of years. And he had a terrible reaction that involved something called akathisia. And people have to forgive me for pronouncing the word, because I've never heard of it before, but it's like an intensely painful and horrible reaction to the drug. It's so bad that most people become suicidal very quickly because it's just so unendurable. So he had that, and he went to the best medical center in North America to be treated for that, and they couldn't treat him. They could not help him get off the benzodiazepine. And by the time he came out of there, 6 weeks later, he was on more drugs, and he was still experiencing the unendurable symptoms. And his whole family, including Jordan himself, believed that he would die. And so he ended up going to a rehab clinic, I believe, first in Russia, and then ultimately he went to Serbia, and he went to a number of hospitals in both Russia and Serbia, I believe. I don't know, I can't remember now all the details, though I did read about it. And then finally was able to be brought back home to Toronto, where he's still experiencing some of this akathisia. Certainly in December and January, he reports that he had many hours of this intensely painful response, and he's starting to be better now. But to think so that all came out last February, and immediately there were gleeful, vaunting comments by people. And we did a video about a particular article that had been written by a woman named Lindsay Bearstein for the magazine The New Republic, in which she was joyful and full of satisfaction at being able to report that it seemed that the whole Peterson family had made disastrously bad choices in his treatment of this problem, and that his so-called addiction, which the Petersons do not agree, and neither do medical experts, that this was a case of addiction. This was a case of an adverse physical reaction, a side effect to the drug, not an addiction. But anyway, of course, everybody said, here's the proponent of self-reliance and stoicism. Here he is, he's addicted to drugs. And so there were all these vaunting comments. I remember one in the National Post article saying, clean your room, bucko, and, people just having a field day with it. A professor at the University of Ottawa named Amir Adaran took to Twitter, making comment after comment, full of glee that this man had fallen so low. And, then there was this Lindsay Bearstein article pretending that this was all as a result of Jordan Peterson's so-called toxic masculinity, his inability to admit his own weakness, and that his entire theory of life should be therefore discredited. And now we have this article essentially striking all the same notes and revealing an almost inconceivable level of malicious satisfaction in another person's suffering, and a determination, without even having read any of his work. I am sure that Lindsay Bearstein in the New Republic never read 12 Rules for Life or watched very many of his videos, and I'm absolutely positive that Decca Aitkenhead never read 12 Rules for Life, because her article is full of misrepresentations and outright inaccuracies. So bad that I don't see, she shouldn't be able to be a journalist, certainly not for a supposedly preeminent newspaper like the Times of London. Sorry, that was long. I won't go on like this for the whole discussion, but.
No, you hit a lot of high points pointing out there, and that is the story. The story is this is not a journalist. In fact, there aren't any journalists in
Not
the
many.
left-wing media anymore. Like to work for left-wing media, I'm not going to call them journalists. You have to be committed to feminism. It's a
Yeah.
socialist group, socialist propaganda stations, and so they're not honest.
Yeah. No.
They have an agenda, and their agenda here is to destroy Peterson, frightened that he might be turning some people away from their narrative.
Yeah.
They're terrified of a guy like him. He's too
Yeah.
smart for them, and he's too revealing, too
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. And so she deliberately, I mean, she either knows that she is entirely misrepresenting who he is and what he has said over the past, I don't know, what, 4 or 5 years of his public prominence, and even before, of course. She's either deliberately misrepresenting it and knowing that she's doing it, or she's too stupid to realize and hasn't done her homework in even the most basic sense. And whichever one it is, she, shouldn't be a journalist. Well, she shouldn't be writing at all. She shouldn't be taken seriously in any way. It's actually incredible. I mean, if you haven't read the article and also listened to the interview, you might think that I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not. It's just an astounding case study in mendacity.
And we're going to go over shortly some quotes from the article. But there's just too much of the interview to really go over it. But the interview, if you get nothing from the interview, you're going to get the sense of a very smart guy who went through a lot of troubles and was being like completely honest and vulnerable about his troubles, being interviewed by a interviewer pretending to have compassion. If you listen to the interview and she didn't write the article, you would get the impression that she felt compassion and understanding for Peterson's problems. But she doesn't. When she put the article out, this is like sticking the knife into the back of somebody who fully trusted you. That's what she did.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that she did use a comparison to Trump in her illegitimate comparison to Trump. But the one thing they have in common, Peterson and Trump, is that the media relentlessly and viciously misrepresented them for their as much as they can in order to destroy them. The one thing that Trump and Peterson have in common is that they are a threat to the mainstream elitist agenda and narrative. They are both a threat. That's why they're attacked so viciously. That's my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely.
Excuse me.
Very, very well put. I mean, she just had to get Trump in there, and it's just ridiculous how she slanders Peterson, and that's a good comparison, I think, to how the mainstream media has dealt with Donald Trump. And we should maybe mention also, again, this is widely available on the internet for anybody who's interested, but. As the Peterson family have stressed, the only reason that Jordan agreed to do this interview, I mean, he's still physically and emotionally, obviously, very fragile. The only reason he agreed to do this interview was because this woman, Decca Aitkenhead's, like her senior editor at the paper, contacted Michaela and said, "Oh, we've been following the news about your father, with so much sympathy and concern.
Right.
We're really interested in doing an interview. And this is the kind of article we tend to write. We write these long form articles. We're, compassionate. We don't just do a glitzy, quick presentation. We really get into details. This would be an opportunity for you to correct any, misperceptions that are out there. And it would be an opportunity to celebrate. That word is actually there, to celebrate your father's life and work." It sounded like it was going to be a really empathetic, honest piece of writing. In fact, more than just honest, it was going to be glowing. And instead, it's a total hit piece. Incredible.
It's shameful that they even have the audacity to follow through on that and publicly do it. They're caught on it now. I think there at least people who aren't totally brainwashed by the mainstream media and the feminism of our culture, they can't walk away from this because Peterson is too big for people just to accept that one article as a definitive statement on who Peterson is. No, there's just Peterson's too big, and they are not big enough to crush him.
Yeah.
So this backfires on them, in my opinion.
I think so.
Yeah. So why don't we get
let's
into
look
the details a little bit?
Yeah, it's amazing.
This is her. This is the author, Decca Aitkenhead, and let's get to some quotes, some excerpts from the hit piece here.
Yeah.
So, reading from the top. For 3 tumultuous years, wherever Peterson went, uproar and adoration followed. His explosive confrontation with Kathy Newman on Channel 4 News in 2018 resulted in the network calling in security experts after some of his supporters posted abuse and threats online. To the millions of young men who idolize him, the erudite, unflappable 58-year-old is a kind of fantasy father figure. Life is tough, he warns them. They need to stop whining, tidy their room, stand up straight, and deal with it. He accuses the neo-Marxist radical left of trying to feminize men and defends traditional masculine dominance. According to Peterson, men represent order. To his critics, he represents the respectable face of reactionary misogyny and a dangerous gateway drug to online alt-right radicalization.
God,
wow, what a way to start out. Just full on lies, deceit, exaggerations, and misrepresentations.
Yeah.
Go
It's
to it, Janice.
Incredible. Can we go back and have it on the screen so I can look at it? 'Cause I don't want to spend too much time, because we could spend the next hour just parsing every one of those sentences and picking apart all the misrepresentations. I don't even know where to start. One, the representation of the Kathy Newman interview, as many of our viewers will know as well as we do, it did not simply result in the network calling in security experts. It resulted in that after not after some of his supporters posted abuse, after she claimed it. We don't even know that there was abuse and threats. Well, there was abuse. There's always abuse when you do a bad job of something, or even when you do a wonderful job. There's going to be people who write abusive things. So what? The thing was, it was not a explosive confrontation. It was Kathy Newman from the beginning of the interview not even giving him a chance to answer a single question. And it was his masterly and witty exposure of the falseness and illogicality of her claims and her attempt to back him into a rhetorical corner. Then going on, the next sentence there, erudite and unflappable. Well, he certainly is erudite, and in some ways he's unflappable. This is also a man, though, who from the very beginning of his career, his public career, has wept openly when he talks about the thousands of people who reveal to him how they've been helped by him and how much it means to them to be told by him that their lives are not meaningless. How shocking that they have had to wait for him. Many of them, yes, young men, although certainly his audience is not confined to young men. Many of these people are people who have gone, yes, mostly men, have gone to university and have been told for their 4 years or however long they spent in academia that they are toxic, that they are worthless, that they are oppressors, that they should step aside, that their only role in life is to apologize for their privilege and to step aside so that women can take over and do a much better job of running the world. So how amazing that these young men were touched by Jordan Peterson's words that their lives can and must have meaning, and that this is perceived as a threat by people like Decca Aitkenhead, supposedly a gateway drug, to the alt-right. Oh yeah, we watch a Jordan Peterson video and next you're reading Hitler's Mein Kampf and talking about the final solution. Like, it's just so ridiculous, such a mischaracterization, both of his message and of the response. And so, everything else there about life is tough, stop whining. No, okay, yes, that's a part of what he said. I mean, it's common sense, isn't it? You can't spend your life whining. You do. And when he talked about cleaning your room, of course, he didn't mean just buck up. He meant that before you try to change the world, which is what many very young people are being conditioned to believe they must do. Before you try to do that, you have to put your own personal life in order. Cleaning your room, of course, was always a metaphor for dealing with your own personal problems and issues and taking responsibility for those. And that is a very useful message. And many, many, many hundreds of thousands, millions of people have responded positively to that message. It's, in the next sentence there, he accuses the neo-Marxist radical left of trying to feminize men. Well, they are. I mean, it's not an accusation without basis. You can find articles everywhere talking about how men have to be more feminine and how they need to open up about their emotions and stop being so toxic and not to be competitive and not to be, aggressive in attempting to realize their goals. What is that except telling men that they should be more feminine? And this thing about how men represent order, that alone tells me that this is either a liar or a very foolish person. He has never said that men represent order. He's talking about masculinity being traditionally associated with order. Probably, I was thinking in terms especially of Jungian archetypes, but I don't know. I mean, in general, of course, yes.
Well, he does use the maleness as order, femaleness as chaos in his book, The 12 Rules for Life, but then there's a lot around that. Yeah, he's speaking metaphorically. Yeah,
he's not saying that women are, cannot access the masculine side of them. Mm-hmm. He fully recognizes, of course, women have a masculine side, men have a feminine side. He's saying that masculinity and maleness at its essence has to do with order. It has to do with building civilization. Femininity has to do with creation and destruction, and creation is anarchic by its very nature. And you can't have a society without both, and that's been his message from day one, that both are absolutely necessary. There is no denigration of women in his message. There is a denigration, and rightly so, of feminist ideology. And so, I mean, this is just, an attempt to smear Peterson, but reveals this woman's, her dishonesty or her stupidity.
I think both. There's a measure of stupidity in there too. To start this level of misrepresentation does reflect an element of stupidity.
I mean, it's actually, I think it does. And it's like, it is astounding. I mean, we're so used to it now because we've been immersed in the propaganda, the stupid, coarse propaganda of the progressivist media for so many years now. But it is just astounding to think, like 50 years ago, if you had read a Times piece about a major public intellectual, you could not have imagined something like this. Even 25 years ago, you could have not have imagined this level of dishonesty and this level of dumb.
Well, that 25 years marks the time in which feminists invaded the mainstream media and most of our public discourse. So feminism itself is all about dishonesty.
Yeah.
It's the entire thing. I deal with that in the Birth of Feminism. You've dealt with this in many, many Fiamengo files, how deliberately dishonest in many cases, and then when it's not deliberately dishonest, it's natural stupidity that pushes the feminist narrative forward. So it should be no shock that now mainstream media is filled floor to floor, floor to ceiling, and wall to wall with stupidity and ignorance.
It's astounding, and it's really frightening.
Yeah. Shall we read another paragraph?
Sure, let's keep going. I mean, okay. There's so much.
All right, I'll read this from the top with me here. That's okay. If his rise to fame was dramatic, what has happened since he disappeared from public view 18 months ago sounds fantastical. In his daughter's words, it is, quote, like a horror movie. A movie in which her father gets hooked on benzodiazepines, becomes suicidal, is hospitalized for his own safety, and then diagnosed with schizophrenia. a lie, by the way, right, Janice? I
Yeah,
don't think
yeah. No,
that word was
no,
ever brought
that's
up.
it's not in the interview at all.
Yeah. Against his doctor's advice, she flies him to Russia to be placed in an induced coma. He emerges delirious, unable to walk, and ricochets from one rehab center to another, ending up in a Serbian clinic where he contracts COVID-19. Back home in Canada at last, from where he speaks to me earlier this month, he breaks down in floods of tears and has to leave the room. When I ask if he feels angry with himself for taking benzodiazepines, his daughter jumps in, arms waving, hold on, and tries to bring the interview to a close.
Yeah.
I don't remember her asking him if he feels angry with himself
No,
about that.
She did.
Did?
Yes. I mean, throughout the entire interview, in fact, she's trying to push that line. That's her line. Are you angry with yourself? Did you feel weak? Do you feel weak now? Do you feel
Yeah.
disgust? Because that's her toxic masculinity angle. Her whole point that she's trying to make, and it's evident in the interview, is that she believes every decision he's ever made is a result of his toxic masculinity, which in her mind is his inability to admit his own weakness. And therefore, he just kept getting himself further and further into problems because he could never ask for help. And supposedly that's his message to other men. And this is why it should all be discredited, because he's giving a message to men, be strong, when he himself tried to be strong and couldn't. And if only he hadn't tried to be strong, he wouldn't have got himself into so much of a mess. But in fact, that message is not Jordan Peterson's message. He's never said to men, be strong. I mean, that's part of it, of course. But, he's never said, don't ask for help. He's never said, don't take, drugs that help you if you have a mental illness. He's saying, find meaning in your life. And the way you find meaning is by taking responsibility for things, because life is suffering. Yeah, contributing.
Like he's heavy on, but that's not even his idea. I think Freud talked a lot about that same thing, that mental health is your work and contributing to society is a huge contributor to mental health in general.
Of course, and it is.
It probably goes way back to pre-Christian times, and that same idea probably is as old as humanity.
Well, it's in Socrates, who talked about how happiness was not a feeling. Happiness had to do with being virtuous. It could be a result. You might not necessarily be happy, but it certainly would be impossible to be happy unless you lived a life of virtue, meaning that you took responsibility and contributed to your society. Yeah, this is ancient wisdom. And it's partly why it's so shocking that in the COVID era, thousands and thousands, millions of people are being denied the opportunity to work. And having their whole, the core of their sense of their identity and their meaning in life taken away from them. This is especially dangerous for men, of course. He's simply tapping into a universally known truth about what.
And yet, she is suggesting here that that this is like bad advice in a sense.
Yeah, of course.
Like but feminists have been hitting on that forever too. Like as if. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No, but you're right. I mean yes, because feminism does seek to destroy, especially the core of male identity, and her whole point here is that it's ludicrous that he claims that the response to suffering is to shoulder burdens and in a way to face and embrace one's suffering. But what else can you do with it? The only other response, as Peterson himself has said, is to be resentful about it, and that just makes everything worse, and to blame others for your suffering. That's the whole to become bitter and to blame others and to lash out and to take revenge on those others for things that you believe they have done to you. and to refuse to take any responsibility. Well, that's the ideology of the left in its worst and crudest forms. And what does it
Its
lead to?
only form, it seems, at most
Well,
time.
now certainly the identity politics brand of leftist ideology, and which, by the way, she never mentions in this whole article, and he mentioned it numerous times in the interview, that's what he's opposed to, is identity politics, because it is based on grievance, it's based on blaming others for one's own suffering and feeling therefore justified in taking revenge and asking the state or state actors to take revenge on one's behalf. And that's a very, very dangerous ideology. It leads to division in society and ultimately to societal breakdown and, horrific purges and violence of the sort that was rampant in the Soviet Union and Mao's China and so on. And he studied, he has the background knowledge about how these regimes have worked out and the enormous human suffering that they've produced from years of study. And yet she's mocking it all here. And she's using his own personal trials as some sort of evidence that nothing he has ever said should be trusted. And of course, she's twisting that. And maybe we could go back to the text again, because everything that she says there is slightly twisted. She gives it all a kind of crude, mocking spin. He wasn't hooked on benzodiazepines. He had a physical reaction. He experienced a very bad side effect. I don't think there's any medical disagreement about this. She's misrepresenting everything there. Hospitalized for his own safety. That makes it sound as if, white-coated men had to march into his house and take him away because he was threatening people or threatening himself. I mean, the family, including Jordan himself, of course, sought treatment. There's nothing nefarious about it. He was never diagnosed with schizophrenia. Yes, it was against his doctor's advice. He went to Russia, but as he made clear in the interview, he tried everything that was on offer in North America and nobody could help him. So there's nothing particularly irrational about the decision to go to Russia. It was the only place that offered the possibility that he could be treated for the particular problem he had. The way she describes it here, how he emerged delirious from this induced coma. Yes, he did, but then within a few days, he was back to himself. He didn't stay delirious for weeks on end. And that, ricocheting from one rehab center to another. He went to a number of hospitals. There was no ricocheting. I mean, the whole thing, the deep contempt there is just mind-boggling. And that at the end there, I would encourage everybody, if you haven't listened to the interview, to listen to the part. Yes, Michaela does jump in when she asks him if he feels angry with himself for taking benzodiazepines. He says, well, yes, maybe I should have known better. And she feels he's misrepresenting there. She jumps in just to say, no, look, you had a physical reaction. You experienced a side effect from a drug that you couldn't possibly have known. It's not your fault that you experienced that. And she didn't try to bring the interview to a close. She just said, look, this has been going on for an hour. We kind of agreed to an hour, so maybe we should start to end it. And Jordan said, I'm doing fine, and let's talk about other things now. Like every single comment by this person is either a half lie or a full lie. It's just, I don't know how she can live with herself writing such a thing. Even if I hated the person I was interviewing, I think I could distance my own feelings enough to present a professional and accurate report of what went on.
Well, I can't disagree with anything you're saying there for sure. I just want to go back to one comment a fellow put up here. I'm just going to put his comment up on the screen. Whoopsie, here we go. Can you all see that there? No,
I can't see it, no.
Okay.
There it is.
We need to quit blaming this on stupidity and being dumb, and that what this is completely intentionally thought out evil. I think we've both talked on those lines before as well. Not just, and this was referring to feminism and their takeover of the mainstream media. You know, the feminists, there is some design behind what feminists seek that it is hidden. I think we've talked on those lines before,
Yeah.
but in any
Well,
case, I thought I would throw that up.
yeah. I mean, I don't really disagree. I don't know. I mean, the ideology, Marxist, feminist, whatever you want to call it, progressivist in general, leftist, the identity politics ideology, it believes so strongly in its own, justified agenda, which is to bring about a far better world where there is allegedly no suffering. And she believes that any valorizing of traditional masculinity she would say that that's evil, that leads all these men astray. So, she believes she's combating evil. So just to call it evil, I'm not sure that's that helpful in a way. I mean, she thinks that Peterson encourages evil by encouraging
exactly.
men, to valorize the masculine. So I don't, it gets really, it's so twisted. It is difficult, of course, to divorce oneself from one's own ideology. I'm sure I have blinders on too, to some extent, but hopefully not to quite this extent.
There's a fundamental problem with socialism, versus individualism that we could get into in another. We probably should have a session just discussing that sometime. Socialism versus individualism, if you will.
Yeah. Let's look at a bit more. I mean, maybe we shouldn't go through it all in so much detail, but there's more parts that are outright misrepresentations.
This is not by any means all of it. These are just a few excerpts.
So the part we looked at was the beginning, and this is from the middle, I think, of the interview. The more he talks, the more I wonder whether toxic masculinity might have been a culprit too. It's clear this was her agenda from the beginning, and she kept pushing it, and he kept responding and saying, no, it wasn't that. But she keeps on. His family history of depression might tell us something about the price to be paid for his bootstrap philosophy. Well, he's never called his philosophy bootstrap. This is her nomenclature and that of many of his critics. Lindsay Bearstein, who was the subject of the video that we did last year, used the exact same phrase. And so she's actually got the gall to claim here that bootstrap philosophy, which is her crude, distorted summing up of kind of conservative ideology, take responsibility for yourself to the extent that you can. He's never claimed that everything that happens to an individual is his or her own fault. He's never claimed that, but this is her crude, reductive version of it. She actually claims that caused his depression. So in other words, she's disagreeing here that depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain. And she's saying that it is something that he has brought on himself and that his whole family suffers from. That when life became excruciatingly stressful, Peterson's stand up, man up, suck it up mentality didn't work. And so therefore we shouldn't trust anything he ever has said. At the very point when the most famous public intellectual on the planet was preaching a regime of order and self-discipline, he was privately in chaos. So this is her ultimate agenda in the whole article, is to portray him as a sham through and through. And then of course she has to bring in Donald Trump. Parallels with Donald Trump come to mind. Another unhappy man, really closed off from his emotions, projecting strongman mythology while hunkered down in a bunker with his family against the world. Well, but whatever one thinks of Donald Trump, I don't agree with that certainly, but it's her agenda couldn't be any more clear when she has to bring in Trump and make this comparison with Peterson. So yeah, this is just an attempt to discredit him. And just, I have a quotation here, chosen almost completely at random from 12 Rules for Life, where he says, and there's many, many passages like this, showing his deep empathy and understanding for human suffering and for the fact that suffering can come beyond one's personal control, no matter how well lived your life. He says, even well-lived lives can be warped and hurt and twisted by illness and infirmity and uncontrollable catastrophe, depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia, like cancer, all involve biological factors beyond the individual's immediate control. The difficulties intrinsic to life itself are sufficient to weaken and overwhelm each of us, pushing us beyond our limits, breaking us at our weakest points. Not even the best lived life provides a defense against vulnerability. Like, how can she go on and talk about a bootstrap philosophy in relation to that? And that's just one passage out of many where he emphasizes that he understands that individuals do not have complete control over their life.
That passage puts the lie to her claim right there, completely.
Yeah.
Completely puts the lie to her claim and thesis.
It's just awful. And maybe we could end, Steve, by looking at near the end when she again outright lies about his determination to create an audiobook of 12 Rules for Life and to finish his second book. And and this is a fascinating case of her lying. Do you have that part?
Yeah, I'm just looking for it here, but there's not that much more to go. Do you want to skip just to that bit?
No, let's go. No, we'll go through it all.
We're only in 40 minutes. So do you have to go shortly?
I have to go in 25 minutes or so. So no, I'm okay.
Okay, so we'll just quickly read these last bits because these little excerpts are all pretty revealing in their own.
Amazing, yeah.
Okay, read from the top here. Peterson's critics will undoubtedly point out that he built an entire intellectual philosophy upon the principle that life is all about pain and suffering, that the strong, manly response is to square one's shoulders and battle through it, not to take drugs and to numb pain.
That's a complete lie. Complete lie, and it's addressed in the interview. She says this to him, and he says, no, I have never advocated that people who are suffering not take drugs. He says that, antidepressant medication has been hugely helpful in his own life and that he recommends it to others. So this is just an outright lie again.
Yeah, nothing but lie. But what else? What we come to expect?
Oh, there it is, yeah.
No, I've never said that. Look, if you're a viable clinician, you encourage people to take psychiatric medication when it's appropriate. What I really encourage in people is to understand that it isn't useful to allow your suffering to make you resentful. And believe me, I've had plenty of temptation to become resentful about what's happened to me in the last 2 years. It was this bit taken from the interview, or is that in the article?
That's taken from no, that is in the article. So that's the one part where she admits implicitly that her own theory is wrong, but she continues with her own theory. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here it is. Yeah, this is, I think, in a way, this isn't the worst, but this is the clearest misrepresentation.
All right, I'll read straight from the top then. Incredibly, throughout all of this, he has managed to write another book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, the sequel to his self-help bestseller. I ask how he feels about the prospect of its publication this spring. Well, I'm ambivalent about it because I can't judge the book properly. I didn't write it under optimal circumstances, to say the least, so I can't make an adequate judgment of its quality. Should we continue on with this?
Yeah, let's just go right to the end, yeah.
Why didn't he postpone the book until he was better? I can tell you why I did it. How I could do it. It was easy because the alternative was worse. He'd lost a year to Tammy being ill, then a year to his own illness. If I would have lost the book, I wouldn't have had anything left. I tell him I'm amazed he managed it and he looks pleased. Reading through. I don't know what that means. And how does he look pleased? Was it a video interview, or I just saw audio?
I think it was a Zoom interview. Yeah, we don't get that part of it, but I guess he recorded on his own the interview from his end.
Okay. Reading onwards, if you would have seen me, believe me, it would have been more amazing. When I recorded the audiobook in November, I had akathisic. Akathisic? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's akathisia, it should be. That's the intense pain that he described, which he describes in detail in the interview, and she never does justice to in her article about it. She just says he had discomfort.
His voice raises and fills with pride. That's a little bit of editorialism there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would go to the studio virtually convulsing in the car. I was moving just frenetically, and then I'd get upstairs into the studio and force myself to not move for 2 hours. If you would have asked me to lay odds on the probability that I would live to finish the recording, I would have bet you 10 to 1 that I wouldn't have. But I did the recording, and it was the same with the book, because not to would have been worse. This is a repetitive theme of his, which I quite like, because too often, Janice, like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to take a break to express this thought here. Too often, people criticize one alternative without ever offering even a worse alternative, no alternative whatsoever. And the implication in our culture, and I think the implication with critics of capitalism and the West, is that there's a better thing out there, but they never present it. Mm-hmm. So I like the fact that what Peterson does is he pulls out options and he says, well, this is the best of my available options. That's the way to conduct a life, or really almost anything. Because what bugs me the most, and I don't know if I'm being clear on this, is these people who go out and they start rattling on democracy and rattling on capitalism and leaving the assumption that these things are holding us back from this utopian perfect possibility. Mm-hmm. When in fact, it's the best. These things may remain to this day to be the best available, realistic, practical options.
Well, exactly. So that's it. And, and he himself has made some of his most powerful arguments pointing that out, that yes, capitalism it's cruel sometimes. And it does produce a lot of the social ills that the critics of capitalism are able to very, provocatively point out. But, so let's say, it's bad in that way. But compared to what? Compared to the 50 million that starved to death during Mao's Great Leap Forward, directly as a result of his policy of collectivization, compared to the, I don't know how many million who died in the Ukrainian forced famine in 1932, because Stalin wanted to eliminate the kulak, the individual farmers. It's like, I mean, I'm just agreeing with you. And that's been one of Peterson's points. And again, she deliberately misrepresents his making of this very personal point here by leaving out his explanation of why he chose the one path rather than the other when both were bad.
Yeah, and he up front in his books and in his talks all the time, he says, life is tough. That means, in a sense, he's telling you, don't expect a rose garden. There's no utopia out there. Now, capitalism can be tough, but try going out for a week in the woods without any of the products of capitalism and see how tough nature really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a lot tougher, or even before democracy, say, I don't know, 1,200 years ago or something. You go just take a walk down the road to the next village and you're likely to get kidnapped, thrown into slavery, or you're going to starve before you get there, or there's going to be no water, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. I mean,
even well into the 18th century in England, when England was already a quite civilized place, it was dangerous to ride in a coach from one town to another. You could be set upon by bandits. The society was just not yet fully ordered. And, anybody who thinks that it's great to go back to something like that, where you have vast swaths of the territory under the control of rival gangs of people or tribal lords or whatever it would happen to be, I mean, that's a terrifying way to live.
Definitely. Well, we're on the same page there, Janice. Shall we read the little bit that's left?
Yeah, let's just come to the end there. It's
okay. He says, but I did the recording. It was the same with the book, because not to would have been worse. So to the degree that I can explain how I was able to manage it, I'm not going to talk about willpower or courage. I'm going to talk about the lesser of two evils. Except, of course, that he has ended up framing his story in terms of his willpower and courage. Well,
and that's how she ends it.
Yeah.
That's that last sentence of her article. So in other words, she's claiming that everything that Peterson said in the interview was a kind of lie, that really he was boasting throughout about his willpower and courage, even while claiming it wasn't about willpower and courage. But in fact, she left out a segment of their conversation there where he explicitly said that he likes work. And that is something that he I don't know, incorporated into his own life very early on, that he preferred to be productive. Being productive gives him his sense of meaning, or at least one of the major sources of his sense of meaning. That's part of what he's tried to communicate to others. I really appreciate that part of his message, because it's one of the things that my dad communicated to me. And I always found it valuable too, that even when you're not feeling particularly, like working, you do it anyway. And often you find that you get into it ultimately, or even if you don't get into it and it's sheer agony that day, forcing yourself to do whatever it is that your work is, at least at the end, you feel you accomplished something. And that is huge. Rather than lying in bed all day feeling awful about yourself, and then by the end of the day you have more reason to feel awful about yourself, when you force yourself to do what you need to do, often the results are absolutely transformative in a positive way. And he made that clear to her, that that's his thing. That's the thing he needs to do. Like, is he bragging about that? Well, maybe, and he's expressing pride. Yeah, fully justified pride in the fact that even when he was suffering and ill, he kept on doing his work, and he produced something that he hopes will be valuable to others. What's wrong with expressing some pride in that? And he didn't make it all about willpower. He said that the alternative of just sitting at home thinking about his problems would have been worse. And indeed, they would have been. So,
yeah, no, can't disagree with that. Man's work very often, or a woman's work, or for women who put their efforts into public work. But a woman's work is a traditional woman's work of raising a family, for instance. That was work, and women got a lot of pride and satisfaction out of that.
Sure, absolutely.
For a man, the corollary is your work in the public sphere, contributing to building the society, and he should feel proud about his accomplishments. They're not small accomplishments. These are huge accomplishments.
Yeah, he's changed history. He will be remembered in 100 years or 200 years for somebody who made a really significant contribution to public life and conversation about our time, and about how to deal with the perennial reality of suffering of various sorts. Yeah, that's not small.
Even if he had never come into the public sphere as he had, his accomplishments are still huge. Yeah. He was a very well-respected, successful professor at the University of Toronto. Yeah. Who shouldn't feel pride about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wrote maps of meaning. He taught thousands and thousands of students. He was a very well-liked professor. And even if he hadn't been a well-liked professor, I mean, he showed up every day. He did his job to the best of his ability. I mean, this is his message, and I guess that is a conservative message. But it's really, it's pretty common sense. And by the way, I don't think he describes himself as a conservative. I think
he actually disavowed both left and right philosophies.
Well, certainly in the interview too.
Yeah, in the interview, he disavowed that in the interview.
End, he talks about, in a way that I would disagree with him. I mean, I'm more right wing than Peterson. Certainly, I think he considers himself a moderate Democrat. Probably, I'm not really sure. Certainly, he could see himself in the center. He doesn't like right-wing identity politics any more than left-wing identity politics. He sees both as equally culpable, equally dangerous, equally to be deplored. I mean, I don't think that the right has been as guilty of, the sins of division and unfair characterization of one's opponents as the left has been over the last 5 years. I disagree with him there completely. I didn't think the insurrection or whatever it was, the raid on the Capitol, I don't see it in the way he characterized it in that interview. But anyway, this notion of just doing your work, that is part of his big philosophy, that is incredibly valuable, and you should take pride in it, even if you never, as you said, don't have an impact on the world. You don't change the world, but you show up every day at work and you do your work to the best of your ability. That's incredibly admirable. And it is a reason to live, and it is a way of overcoming the pain of human existence. I mean, I think that's just an incredibly true lesson. And I guess it really resonates with me because the people that I have most admired and who have shaped me, including my own dad, I mean, that was his philosophy. He loved working, even though the work itself wasn't necessarily that pleasurable. I don't even think. My dad was a commercial fisherman. He got his sense of identity from doing that work to the best of his ability and being better at it than other people, in the sense that he put more of himself into it. And it wasn't even a competition. It was just wanting to have pride in his work. And I think that was a big part of Peterson's message. It's the thing I admire about my own husband. He works every day because he loves to work. And not because it's always fun, although it is a lot of the time, but because there's something valuable about doing things rather than not doing things. There's something wonderful about producing things in the world, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a physical thing or an intellectual or a piece of art or whatever it happens to be. And it's amazing that we've got to a point where that is scorned and ridiculed by our betters, by our intellectual elite.
Well, yeah, the alternative to applying yourself to something productive is to lay down and die. There's no steady state in life, Organisms are either growing or dying. You stop growing and you immediately start to go down and die. So what's really odd here in this coming out of these leftists is that they have a problem with the message that pulling yourself up and getting to work is a good thing. They have a problem with that message, even if it's not Peterson's entire message. But
no,
why would
it isn't? Yeah.
Why? How do we get to a state in a society where we say, "Oh, well, that's a horrible right-wing message that's toxic to society"?
Yeah, I know.
Bizarre.
It is.
Bizarre.
Yeah, I do find it bizarre. It's as if, I think it's because they believe that only the state can bring, stability, equality, justice to the society, so that all efforts should go towards strengthening the state, expanding its scope and its ability to manage and organize the society, because only experts, technocrats, rulers can manage the complexities of society. So any emphasis on individualism is very dangerous and is to be ridiculed.
Well, this comment by Horror Cocktail, I have to agree with. I'm a part of the world. Every time I make myself a better person, I also make the world a bit better. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I agree with you that they do put the emphasis on the state. It's all the greater good. But as someone else pointed out, I think I was reading, I forget where now, the society, it was an article in, I think, the National Post maybe, what the elite mean by for the betterment of society is really them. Society in their world perspective is really the elite. It's not for the betterment of us. It's the betterment of the people at the very top of society.
They imagine, I think they do, many of them sincerely imagine that we will all be better off when we are completely controlled, when they control us, but it's because they have utter contempt for most of us. They think we're
Yeah.
stupid. They think our desires are not for our own good. And they think they know much better. And so they do believe that our lives will be better, but they're going to force them on us, even against our own will. So yeah,
And
it's amazing, really, the arrogance of that point of view, and I think that really comes across in this woman's writings too. She believes, that on the basis of a couple hours of conversation, she can judge both Michaela Peterson and Jordan. She even, I mean, her comments we didn't even get into, and we won't. Her comments about Michaela Peterson, which are even more vicious, if possible. She really hates Michaela, and she even says at one point that, one thing I know is that if my life was in danger. I forget how she phrases it exactly, but she basically says that the last person I would want taking charge of my life would be Michaela Peterson. This is a woman who, as Jordan himself has said in his daughter's defense, put her whole life on hold to travel all halfway across the world to try to save her father's life because she loves her father, and to be crass about that and to suggest that, I don't know, that there's something dishonest about Michaela's attempt to manage her father's life and to help him. It's, the arrogance is stunning.
yeah, it is for sure.
Yeah.
There's one comment here I'll just put up here. Laro802, thank you for the support of Studio Brûlé. He suggested we check out a video by Paul van der Clay talking about this. Never heard of Paul, but brilliant video. So we'll have to have a look at that.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
I should
Janice,
probably get going. I have to do something else now, but that was fun to talk about.
Yeah, well, it needs saying, and fortunately, or rather encouragingly, a lot of people in our sort of sphere of the world are pointing out this as well.
Sure,
So,
we're not the only ones. Yeah, and I'm sure that the next thing is, well, I'm not sure, but I expect that we may next hear Decca Aitkenhead claiming that she's had death threats and rape threats and has had to, get personal security or something like that.
Of course,
It'll be coming.
It's all part of the order, the plan of publishing these things, right?
And the poor me ideology, of course,
Yeah,
always
victims.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
folks, thank you so much for joining us here on Studio Brûlé. And I'll remind you again, like I do at the end of every of these sessions, to do something you love every day, today too. And if you don't have something you love, find something you love to do. It's one of the things that kept me going through some of the worst times of my life, that do it every day, just because you love it. So with that, hope you can join us again next time on Coffee with Steve.
Okay,
See you,
thanks,
Janice.
Steve. See ya.